Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, NBA reporter and analyst for Buha's Block, and welcome to another live show. On today's episode, I'm thrilled to be joined by JSM. I'm sure many of you already follow him on YouTube, first-time guest on the show, and we're going to be breaking down the Lakers' top wing targets, looking at both the free agent market and the trade market. We will talk through the ideal checklist of what the Lakers need or should be looking for at the wing spot. We will look at some unrealistic guys, some guys that I just don't think they could trade for or aren't the right fit. And then we will get into my top 10 broken down into tiers. And Jaron and I will debate it and go through. And I know he's got his ranking, so that'll be a fun discussion. But JSM, aka Jaron, or you could reverse that. How you doing, man? How you doing today?
Doing great. Looking forward to a bunch of Laker news and hopefully some good signings and maybe trades in the coming week here. But excited to get into it. Love talking wing targets and plenty to get through.
Let's get into it. So first things first, to me, the most important thing in terms of any wings that the Lakers are adding in a starting context, or if there is the one primary guy, and we still don't know, I talked about it earlier today. There's been a ton of buzz that Marcus Smart is going to be leaving the Lakers and joining the Houston Rockets. So they will have to fill that hole in the starting group. We still don't know what's happening with LeBron or with Rui. So there could also be a hole at the four. Tentatively, I'm more so focusing on the three position, but I think this player ideally has some utility between the three and the four, and maybe could even play at the two if necessary. But I think first and foremost, it has to be an elite perimeter defender. Like that is the baseline thing here for me. Now, not every name on this list is an elite perimeter defender, and that's where the Lakers just have limited means to find this type of player. But to me, it's got to be a guy preferably 1 through 3, if not 1 through 4. Those are the check boxes I'm looking for in terms of defensive versatility. Because I think if you look at the Lakers have a center, they have Austin Reeves, and they have Luka Doncic. Austin can guard 1s and 2s. Luka can guard 3s and 4s, and then the center can guard 5. So you need, especially from that top perimeter position, someone who can take the primary guy in the backcourt or take the primary guy on the wing. They don't necessarily have to be able to guard 4s, because I think you should be able to get by with either the other forward or with your center guarding a 4, and maybe you cross match depending on the matchup. But I think this guy's got to be able to guard point guard, shooting guard, small forwards at a minimum. What do you think of that being the most important trait before we get into more of them?
Yeah, no, I think you make a great point. We've heard so much about that they want youth, athleticism, ideally that two-way build, something that they didn't really have a lot of this season. They were lacking it, in my opinion. That would be ideally what they should go after from really a easy baseline standpoint. I would agree with you. Got to be a versatile, switchable defender, athletic, can run the court, isn't gonna, get tired out in 20 minutes. Ideally, kind of that build, something that they didn't have much of this season.
Then next thing for me along those lines would be baseline level of length, athleticism, and motor. I'm looking at those three things combined. I think this should be an energetic, defensive-minded player. So even if they aren't necessarily an all-defense level guy or this lockdown defender, I think they need to have some defensive mindedness in their game. That they need to have shown a certain floor defensively and certain attitude defensively. So I think that's really important. Ideally, an above-average three-point shooter. So league average is roughly 36%. Something in that range, if not above. It's bonus if they are an elite shooter at 40+%. Then comfortable playing off the ball, cutting, running the lane in transition, spacing the floor from the corners and wings. Like this is primarily going to be an off-ball player. You have your on-ball checked with Luka and Austin. And we could get to it at the bottom, but like to me, ball handling, passing, shot creation, those are nice to haves, not needs. So I'm not focusing on that. In a general sense, need to complement Luka and Austin on both sides of the ball. And again, remember, Luka defends forwards and wings, Austin defends guards. So you don't need like two forward defenders. You need some versatility there, especially with how much LA switches. At least an average rebounder by wing standards, but I would like above average, especially if it's someone replacing LeBron or Rui. I think there's a smart line here in terms of like the Mendoza line in baseball. I think there's a smart line where this player should be an upgrade over Marcus Smart. I think that should be the minimum goal for LA. Healthy and available, which depending on some of these names is relative, and then preferably under 30 years old. I think only one of the guys that, or two of them, excuse me, are above 30 or above. Everyone else is under 30, and ideally a multi-year solution. Then for me, ball handling, passing, shot creation, those are nice to haves. Those are not needs. So if you are just a shooter or a cutter transition guy, like I don't really mind that. Is there anything I missed here? Do you agree with most of this? Like how would you rank and prioritize some of these things?
Yeah, I think you make a really good point about Marcus Smart, how you mentioned before too. At this point, will he be back? Won't he be back? If he's not back, they definitely have to replace that. The activity on defense, that's got to be a big priority. Committed, safe defenders are great, but you need a little bit of disruption on defense too. Ideally with the deflection, steals per game, again, with Marcus Smart, what he gives them. If they have to replace that, that's got to be a big priority. Ideally, I think the variables for me is how good of that can you get while keeping it both in the timeline fit, below the age of 30, and the durability. Are they going to have to pick and choose, or can they have their cake and eat it too? Can they get the health, durability, the defense, disruption, and everything all in one? Ideally, if they can, that'd be great. But that's kind of what's on my radar too. How much of that can they get? And can they get it in one, or will that have to be 2 or 3 different wings that they have to pick up?
Might be a wing by committee. It seems like they probably have to pick between the center spot and the wing spot in terms of doing it by committee. I would probably prefer spend on the center and do committee by the wing if I have to pick one of those two, but you could argue the other way, right? Like it really depends on the opportunity cost of who's available. That brings us to this next slide, which is unrealistic wing options. And I would say most of these guys are pretty clearly off the market. There might be a couple, and we could get into those that are potentially on the market, but Jaylen Brown, Lakers don't have enough for him. Trey Murphy, don't think they have enough for him. And I have questions about the fit with Luka and Austin defensively. Jaden McDaniels and Tamani Kamara, don't think they can hit the price, and I don't see why those teams trade them. Wiggins just resigned. Jalen Suggs is maybe one that could be available, but he has a contract from the low 30s into the mid 30s, which would be that would be your move. And I would prefer going the Kessler, Duran, Watson route to spoil my number one target. But maybe Suggs, depending on if you miss out on some of those key guys, I could entertain Jalen Suggs. I do really like the fit. I just think the contract plus the injury history plus the lack of shooting makes it a little tough. Dylan Brooks, Phoenix is looking to retain him longer term. Michael Porter Jr., I think contract it does have only one more year, but $40 million, that's tough to fit in. Find something that works. Neesmith, I think Indiana is looking to keep him. He's on a great deal. And then Mathurin is the other one that's maybe available here, but the Clippers did tender their restricted offer to him, and I feel like he's going to be in a range where, like, unless you blow the Clippers away, they're not. They're probably just going to retain the asset. And he's not a guy that I would want to pay like $30 million a year, or even like 25 necessarily. So I feel like if you're not going above a certain number, the Clippers are probably just retaining him. So those are the guys I think are unrealistic. And then at the bottom, I just have, to me, John Collins and Jonathan Kuminga. People might mention them. I view Collins as a 4-5, and then Kuminga I view more as like a 4 who I would not want to use in a stopper role. So if you are adding Kuminga, I want an elite defensive center and an elite defensive wing, and that would be how he slots in there. But to me, he's not as good as the names we're about to talk about defensively. Any names stand out here as potentially available, or any other names you'd like to throw in here in terms of unrealistic?
I think you covered it pretty well. I'd love to have a few of them be realistic. Anyone from a Trey Murphy, obviously, that'd be fun. The fit, the timeline, that'd be great. Athleticism. Maybe a Michael Porter Jr., but would you want to go that route given that the defense isn't very good? The 3-point shooting would be great, the spark and everything like that. But yeah, I think you covered a lot of it. The maybe with Jalen Suggs, potentially. Orlando, they're kind of pushing that second apron. Maybe eventually they might have to offload a bit of salary, but it doesn't have to be Suggs that they have to trade. Unfortunately, Wiggins, you mentioned too, just resigned that new 3-year deal with Miami. They should be a fun team, but that does take Wiggins off the list too.
How do you feel about Mathurin? What do you think of his game?
He's a lot of fun, but I don't know if he'd really fit with a Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves led team. Defense, like we've seen him do it during their 2024 NBA Finals run. There are some moments I'm like, hey, wait, can Mathurin be a two-way guy, or is he simply offense and scoring, putting up points? That's kind of what he cares about more. I feel like he's got development to go to yet. We don't really know for sure what he is. I don't love the fit right now. They'd be taking a chance on a high upside guy. Maybe could get him for a decent price, but definitely not my favorite target. I would say kind of does borderline on that realistic, unrealistic, but how many restricted free agents do you want to go after if you're already doing that with the center market? So maybe not too many with the wing market too.
That's part of my calculation here is like, I just think they're going to prioritize 2 or 3 other RFAs. So it's like, by the time you get down to where Mathurin is, do you really want to play that RFA game with Benedict Mathurin? I think it would have been different had they not tendered the qualifying offer to him and him just being an unrestricted free agent. I would have him somewhere in the back end of my top 10. But to your point, there's just some guys here where I think the offensive fit with Luka and Austin, it's a low bar to fit well next to those guys, because you just have to be able to shoot and like attack from the second side and get out in transition and have a certain amount of wiggle or athleticism, and like you'll fit in fine next to those two guys. The question for me is the defensive side, and that's where I think he's like a slightly above average defender at best, and that's like maybe being kind. And so that's not the guy that, like, I think overall you're starting at a deficit with Luka and Austin. You need to add clear positives to like offset that. So that's the challenge ahead. Let's get into the challenge. So tier number 1 for me is franchise cornerstones. And for those who watched my center breakdown, my tier number 1 was Walker Kessler and Jalen Duren. Those were the only 2 guys I had in my tier number 1. In this tier number 1 for the wing spot, I have Peyton Watson. This is the guy to me that is a clear cut above everybody else. And if you look at the entire game, the all-around game, he is a plus 3-point shooter, shot 41% on threes, including 46% on catch and shoot threes this past season. He developed as a shot creator, an ISO scorer. He's a threat off the ball as a cutter and a weapon in transition. He's a solid rebounder. And looking at his defensive metrics, not only does he project as a really good defensive piece, but he also can operate point of attack, wing stopper. He can slide up a bit and guard some fours, depending on, like, I think the behemoths will push him around, but most modern fours, I think he can defend. And then I think 1 through 3, he's like, ideal defender you would want at that position. So if he wants to go the Jeremy Grant route and like go and be the franchise guy somewhere in terms of being a 25 point per game scorer, then maybe the Lakers aren't the right fit. But if he wants to go average 18 to 20 points per game and be the number 3 guy and be their primary wing stopper, I think it's a clear fit. So do you agree with Peyton Watson being the number 1 guy and being in his own tier? And how do you think he'd fit with the Lakers?
Yeah, you and me definitely agree on this one. I think he, on the open market, especially the RFA market, by far and away the best one to go after for a wing. Has shown good defensive ability, can guard and switch 1 through 3, sometimes 1 through 4, like you mentioned. Isn't the biggest, burliest forward, but very tall, lanky, athletic, great timeline fit. Definitely in my tier 1 for a wing target. Obviously, though, being an RFA, do they want to commit 30 million? We've heard reports saying that it might take 28, 30 plus million to even make the Nuggets balk and maybe not matching the offer. So that's a big chunk of their cap space that they may or may not have put toward Peyton Watson. I would be inclined to go that route if they feel like they really can't get a Kessler or Duren. I like the fit. You mentioned the versatility on defense. He can, guard and switch again. Something that he'll offer that not many other wings will, maybe one other that we'll get to in a bit, we'll see if we agree or not, is that kind of help side rim protection. You're not going to get that from very many wings. Peyton Watson averaging over 1 block per game and, roughly around 20 minutes per game on average so far. You're not going to find that. And if you're playing with a not so great rim protecting center. If they don't get Kessler, if they don't get that elite shot blocking big, if they maybe get an average one or, better offensively, but not great defensively, Watson can help that player out a bit too, around the rim, chasing in transition too. So a lot to factor in with Peyton Watson. Yes, it'll be a lot to get him, but it might be worth it if you factor everything in. Definitely in my tier 1 though too.
I think I'm curious to hear what you think about this. I think I would take him over Jalen Duren.
Okay.
Now, I would not, to be clear, because sometimes you got to be careful with what I say. I would not pay him more than Jalen Duren. But if Jalen Duren is staring down and now he's obviously in sign and trade talks or trying to negotiate sign and trade talks with the Sacramento Kings, and the Lakers are going to have a meeting with him tomorrow. If he's going somewhere in that 40 to 45 million range and you could get Peyton Watson at 28, 30 million, I think I would prefer Watson at 28, 30 and then use the additional space to go get a Daniel Gafford or a center above the unrestricted free agent guys. But if there's a way to trade for, or you could also potentially go trade for Herb Jones and Yves Missi with picks. And I'd rather go that route than spend 45 of my $52 million in cap space on Jalen Duren, and then you have $7 million left and the room exception. So I think Kessler's the one where the fit is so great and so perfect for exactly what the Lakers need. I'm willing to blow most of my cap space on that if I'm the Lakers. With Duren, I think there's some limitations with the defensive fit. He's not quite the defensive anchor you want. And I think he's also probably going to cost more than Kessler. So if he's costing $7 million more than Kessler, and that's $7 million less you have to spend on a less than ideal fit, in my opinion, I might just prefer the Watson route. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I've actually talked about that on my channel too. Given that Duren is probably in that 45 or 40 to 45 million range, what reports kind of hint at. Not trying to aggregate you or anything here either, but yeah, if it would cost that much for Duren to be had compared to Watson at 30 million-ish, you got some other room to play with. If you can get Watson first and then have 15 million of space to go after a different center target. No, unfortunately, at that point, it wouldn't be Kessler. But like you said, you have more room to work with. Watson would be a good foundational wing player for them to add to their team. Good fit. And for the price comparison, you can go back and forth on what they need more, a center or a wing. But given you have to pick between Duren or Peyton Watson, Watson at 30 compared to Duren at 45, maybe, I would definitely pick Peyton Watson too. I think the all-around fit's better. Kessler, yes, if you throw him into that conversation, it might be different. That's such an ideal fit. I do agree with you. But Watson in that wing target that you go all in for, per se, I would say that it would be more worth it in that route compared to putting it all toward a guy like Jalen Duren.
What would be your max offer for Peyton Watson? Let's go offer sheet, and then I don't think Denver's going to play ball with the Lakers and try to help them get Peyton Watson. So I kind of feel like that's a non-starter. But if hypothetically Denver was willing to play ball here, and it's just like Peyton Watson's like, the Lakers will pay him $40 million if it takes poaching him from you. But like, let's just work on a sign and trade. Let's say Denver agrees to that. What would be your max offer sheet, straight up, no sign and trade? And then if they do agree to a sign and trade, maybe it's a slightly lower number. What's like the most you'd give up in a trade?
Yeah, I've gone back and forth on it with Peyton Watson, but max offer sheet, trying to get Denver to not match it, what they would balk at. I probably would go 35 million. If you would front load it, maybe 38, 40. That would definitely be a lot. But if you're going to get Peyton Watson, if you're going to make them not match the offer sheet, you're probably going to have to go 35 plus, in my opinion. You can argue if it's worth it or not, but he's by far and away the best wing target on the open market. I like the front-loaded contract route. I've seen some people throw that idea around. It might be tough to build their ideal team with that front-loaded contract and 35 to 40 million in year number 1 and 2. But hey, on the back end, it might be easier. You have a long-term plan with Luka and Austin. He fits the timeline. He should get better in that time frame too. So that could be one option. Then the sign and trade route. At that point, you'd be paying a little bit less. Ideally, if they could sign and trade for 28 million to begin with, get a little bit more financial room this offseason, then throw in a first round draft pick. Denver, they can't really take back money, even after if they would let Peyton Watson go. They kind of still have salary problems. Even after that point, they're still pushing the second apron. So they probably wouldn't want a whole lot of salary back in return. I don't think they'd really want a Dalton Connect or Jake Arabia. You could offer them one. I think they'd want the draft compensation, the trade assets, so an unprotected first. Sign and trades are a little bit different than regular trades. You don't typically get as much back in return, but a sign and trade offer for me and what I would see if they would agree to the sign and trade and let Peyton Watson go for a more reasonable price, I'd offer an unprotected first.
Agreed. I think we're pretty close. I think if it's just straight up offer sheet, I'd probably go something like 4 years, 145 million. And that's with factoring in he's 23, going to turn 24 next season. So he's really young. This is going to take you into his prime. And that 145 is a little high, a little bit higher than what I would want. Because it's almost like 36.3 AAV, but it would be front loaded to your point of, starting in the high 30s to make it really tough on Denver. And then that would be a declining contract. So instead of it starting in the 30, 32 range and working its way up, it would be the inverse. And you would try to force Denver's hand that way. If it's a sign and trade, I'd want it something closer to like 130 in terms of a max. Like obviously you want these numbers lower, but we're talking like if it's really like a matter of if you get the guy or not, I think I'd go 130 with the first. So I think the benefit to the sign and trade is you maybe can walk that number down because you're locking it in and saying like we're going to offset any risk of you potentially matching this with the pick versus the offer sheet. You kind of have to keep upping it just because if you don't, it's going to be July 8th and then they potentially match it. And then now you're in a compromised position. So I think we're pretty close to an agreement there. Ultimately, I'd want to keep it around 30. I wouldn't really want to pay him more than that, but it does feel like depending on where Denver's at, it could go like 32 to 35. That might be the spot that ultimately poaches him. Because Denver's in a tough spot. Like if they do get off the money, they can't afford him, but they have not done it so far. They only have so much time to figure that out. So I think we're in agreement there. Now, tier 2, ideal starters. This was the toughest tier for me. I went back and forth with, I would say Derek Jones Jr. was the guy I comfortably had 5th, but 2 through 4, I shuffled these guys multiple times. And it really came down to honestly Herb versus Tari Eason for me for that second spot. And I think there's a strong case for Tari Eason. I think he's been, I think his game is much stronger than what has been shown in Houston up to this point. He's also been in not necessarily like the primary defensive role, which I think he can take on. But Herb number 2, Tari Eason number 3, PJ Washington number 4, Derek Jones Jr. number 5. What do you make of this tier? Do you agree with the order? And is there anyone else you think should be in this tier?
Yeah, I'm pretty close to you. I actually do have it flip-flopped. I have Tari at 2 or number 1 in tier 2, and I have Herb number 2 in tier 2. So we're pretty identical with that. I went back and forth on if PJ Washington is even realistic or unrealistic. I've thought about throwing him in before when we did the intro, but I think he's on that borderline to where you can argue he's fairly realistic. I think the unrealistic part comes in with, will Dallas make a trade with the Lakers, and will the infamous Laker trade tax come into that? Who knows? But that could be something to factor in. I have Tari number 1 in my tier 2, Herb number 2, and then kind of a toss up again with PJ Washington. And then I actually do have Derek Jones Jr. in there as well, comfortably in that 5th spot for me too. I went back and forth as well, just like you, if he should be in the tier 2. But I think what does put him in that tier 2 for me anyway is the proven fit with Luka Doncic. They went to the NBA Finals together. Yes, he can be a shaky 3-point shooter at times, but 2 years in a row here, he is 35% plus. So maybe some improvement, getting better as a corner shooter, great off-ball cutter, a wing that can be a lob threat. Luka loves to play with that. So that's kind of what talked me into putting him in the tier 2. But he might look maybe to the I don't want to say casual fan, but simply looking by names, might not look like you would fit in with them. But yeah, that's pretty similar to my tier 2 as well. I try to talk myself into a few other names and being in that tier 2, but for realistic targets and guys that are likely available on the trade market or the free agent market, I think you hit the nail on the head here.
Let's talk through Herb versus Tari, because I mean, on paper, Tari Eason is more of what the Lakers need, in the sense of, I think he is closer to checking the two-way boxes. He was 37-ish% three-point shooter, and that carried over. Well, 36%, I think, in the regular season, 37% in the playoffs, 37% on catch and shoots in the regular season. So he checks that box as an average-ish shooter to slightly above average. He had the wild swings of like the first half of the season. He was around 40%. Second half of the season, he was at 28%, had an extended slump where he couldn't make a shot. He's a better rebounder than Herb Jones. So that is another factor here on both sides of the ball. I just think Herb Jones is at a different level defensively. You look at his defensive metrics, and he's got an A+ perimeter defensive grade on B-ball index. And I just think you also look at, like, to me, I started off with elite defender who can defend 1 through 3. That is Herb Jones. I think Herb Jones is easily a top 10 player for that specific role, if not knocking on the door of top 5. And he's got the unique blend of, he's got the length at around 6'5", 6'6" with really long arms, but he can also has the foot speed to hang with the quicker guys. So I think in terms of like the fitting in place of Marcus Smart, he's a guy who I think it would be a seamless fit, because Marcus was primarily 1 through 3. He could obviously switch on to bigger guys, but it was like whoever's the best 1 through 3 guy, Marcus starts off on him. I think Herb Jones could do that exact thing. And I also think, I look at the level of playmaking he's played with in New Orleans, and it's just been so underwhelming. And his shot quality has not been what you would want from a role player who's dependent on guys generating looks for him. So I think in a proper slotting, playing off of Luka and Austin, it would unlock an offensive ceiling we've yet to see from Herb Jones. And I just think he's at a different level defensively for the specific ask that the Lakers have, where Tari Eason can guard some point guards, but I do view him more as a 2 through 4 defender. So just that little shift of Herb more 1 through 3, Tari more 2 through 4. That's where I lean Herb. But you could argue the shot, the offensive rebounding. I think Tari's got more offensive utility. So maybe I'm too married to that 1 through 3 concept. But to me, I just think Herb Jones he's also already locked up. So Tari, you got to do the whole dance with RFA. That was another decision breaker for me, where Herb is locked up for 4 years. Tari, you got to come to some sort of number that Houston's going to be with, okay, letting him walk. So that was me splitting hairs, but why did you go with Tari over Herb?
Yeah, you made a lot of good points. I feel like we could probably do an hour live stream off just Tari versus Herb here. But for Tari, I would kind of go the 3-point shooting. Lately, it's been more consistent. With Herb this season, he's at 31%. Yes, he had a 41% 3-point shooting year too. So it's very up and down. 35% overall for him, career average. But I went with Tari mainly also because the Pelicans have been hard to work with, according to reports anyway. The demands that they've reportedly made for Herb and Trey Murphy, multiple first-round draft picks. Yes, he's under a contract that I view as a pretty good contract. I think he'll live up to it. I think you made a really good point about the optimization around Herb. He hasn't played with a good point guard, hasn't played with a whole lot of stability in New Orleans. That could help him. But ultimately, I think Tari, for kind of the upside, I would go Tari with the 3-point shooting. Herb is more dependable, in my opinion. Defensively, I would agree with you. But I would say between the upside, not having to deal with New Orleans and having to pay their price, we don't really know, I guess, what it would take for Tari to get him away from Houston. That would be another thing to factor in. Would it take 15, 20, 25 million? If you're pushing Peyton Watson territory, at that point, I would put Herb above Tari. But given that you could get him for a somewhat decent price, I like the upside more. I like what he still has the ability to become. Much higher offensive ceiling with Tari compared to Herb. Lower defensively. I also agree he's more of a wing defender 2 through 4 compared to Herb, who is a little bit more of a point of attack, a little bit more laterally quick, able to keep up with point guards. And if you're replacing Smart, that might have to be factored in. You can go back and forth. I just slightly put Tari above Herb for the reasons I listed there.
I love both of them. I mean, that could be the answer here. I mean, they would fit, I think, in a 3-4 context next to, I mean, I don't think you could get Kessler and both of them necessarily. I mean, depending on the money, you could potentially make it work, but I think that's unlikely. But yeah, I mean, that like a defensive anchor center plus those two in the front court, Herb Jones is like the one kind of shaky offensive player you have, but then you have those two defensively plus a defensive anchor like that, I think is a really strong foundation. In terms of max price that I would give up for either one of these guys, for Herb, I would offer an unprotected first. I'm not giving anything more. They can take it or leave it. They want the 2 firsts. Sayonara, not giving it. So Herb, I would give an unprotected first. I think he's that good, but that's it. So if that's not enough, that, you know, maybe he's in the unrealistic list because the Lakers will not give 2 firsts in this scenario for him. Tari Eason, I think I would go 4 years, 90 million. So just under 23 AAV. And that's absolute max there. I would prefer something in the 475, 480 range. But I think if you're playing the RFA game, you have to overpay. That's just part of playing the game. So with the understanding that Tari's probably a high teens guy, maybe 20-ish, depending on if his shot can stabilize, I would go a little bit above that, but I don't think I would go much more over than like 22, 23 AAV. Where are you at with both those guys in terms of their value?
Yeah, identical for me with Herb. One unprotected first, that would be my max offer. I mean, if they want Dalton Connect or Jake the Arabian there for a wing replacement, go ahead. But one unprotected first would be my max for him too, identical to you. For Tari, I think for what the Rockets would like to get him at would be that 20 AAB, maybe a little bit less. To get him away, like you said, you're going to have to overpay. So I have him at a max of 4,100. Maybe I'm a little bit high on Tari. He's had some ups and downs, but if you're going to get him and if you're going to miss out on Peyton Watson, which is definitely a fairly high likelihood, unfortunately, but Tari would be a great backup plan. The Rockets are not quite in the salary cap issues that Denver has, but if you push it high enough, they're pretty close. So that could be an option. And ideally, again, below 4 years, 100, 4 years, 80 would be perfect. But I would overpay for him a little bit too.
And what about PJ Washington and Derrick Jones Jr.? How did you break that down between those two?
Yeah, a lot of it came down for proven fit again with Luka Doncic. PJ Washington, I would do like a lightly protected first round draft pick. You could maybe talk me into an unprotected first, given that the Lakers have the cap space to fully absorb him. I think he is under contract for another 3 years here. I think maybe 4. Fairly good contract. I think I prefer Herb's contract a little bit more compared to PJ, but you wouldn't have to work out a new deal with him. I put him slightly above Derrick Jones for that reason. He's not under contract long term. Lightly protected first, probably would take an unprotected first, especially if the infamous Laker trade tax does have to kick in. But that's probably around the realm for me for PJ Washington. Kind of the same thing for Derrick Jones, working with the Clippers. If they offload Kawhi Leonard, maybe tonight yet, that'd be fun to watch. They'd probably offload Derrick Jones Jr. too. Hopefully that would lower the price for him. They'd want to simply offload him and get draft capital, draft compensation, maybe a lightly protected first round draft pick. Ideally, you could even go top 8 protected, but I think that would be pushing it. That's kind of my realm of the price that I think I would give up for both of them.
I'm similar. I mean, I think at this stage, to be completely honest, like it depends on obviously the construction of the roster and what your alternative is. But I think the Lakers need to invest in either the center spot or the wing spot. I don't want to, like, if I'm them, I don't want to be coming out of free agency with Robert Williams and Mitchell Robinson and Kelly Oubre or something like that. No shade to Kelly Oubre, who we'll touch on in a second, but like I want to aim a little bit higher. So I would like to come out of, if I'm the Lakers looking at my tier 1 and tier 2 of the centers, which were Kessler, Duran, Isaiah Hartenstein, that was pre him signing the new deal, and then Derek Lively the second. I would ideally like one of those 4 or one of these 5. I think if you can walk, and ideally you get one of the RFAs, but like that might not be in the cards because those teams are in control of their players' future. So I would like one of those 3 centers or one of these 5 wings as one of the starting upgrades at the 5 or the 3. And that would make me confident, or more confident at least, in like the Lakers build and that they're heading in the right direction. So I think with Washington or Derek Jones Jr., especially factoring in the relationship dynamics here, where I don't think LA and Dallas like won't trade together. Like I know people are joking about the draft stuff. That I'm like, it's so low stakes that I don't want to read too much into that. But I think it's more so like Dallas cannot walk away from a Lakers trade without it being like universally assumed it's at least neutral value, if not slightly in Dallas's favor. So that's where they've been asking for a first for PJ Washington. No one's wanted to pay it. I think if you did give up a first, yes, there's a bit of a Lakers tax. There's a bit of a Luka tax there. But if that's the cost to get PJ Washington, and then looking at the unrestricted options, like I just think he's better than them. And there is some there's some overlap with him and Tari in terms of being like big wings. I think PJ guards up more like 3 through 5, but both good rebounders. And PJ also is a solid shooter, more as a catch and shoot guy rather than his shot's been up and down a bit. But I think if it really came down to it for Washington or Jones, I would give up an unprotected first just because of how dire the wing market is in general, and assuming that the Lakers are then saving some money at the center spot. Maybe you can get the Kessler or Duran and add one of these guys. It's a slippery slope. It's a little tricky, but with Derek Jones, I also think that there's a Clippers dynamic, and that's where I just don't think the Clippers are going to do the Lakers any favors. So if it costs an unprotected first, or maybe to your point, like a top 8 protected, something like that, I would be open to that. But Derek Jones, I think, is a better shooter than people realize, and is also really high-level cutter and offensive rebounder. You have the proof of concept with Luka. I just think he's a guy who's also 1 to 3 defender, similar to Herb. He just has a ton of injury stuff, and Herb has some injury stuff. Tari, like all these guys have their question marks with the health, where they've all had some injury stuff. But Derek Jones is a little bit more extensive than the rest, so that was one of the tiebreakers for me. I just feel like you can't trust he's going to play 60, 65 games necessarily.
Yeah, I think you make a good point with that too. I feel like pretty much every other wing target nowadays does have a durability issue. I think maybe with a guy like Herb coming from a Pelicans team that's, quite frankly, tanked a little bit in the past couple of years, how much is that holding him out compared to, can he really play? Can he not play? There's that funny moment earlier this season where he sat out for like 15 games, and then the Lakers came up and he magically was available for that game. Maybe
always
that's
against the Lakers.
Yep, always. But yeah, that's something to factor in here too. Derek Jones might be a little bit bigger of an issue compared to the other guys, in my opinion, compared to Tari, PJ, even Herb a little bit, given the context I provided there. But yeah, if you could get one of them, I'd feel a whole lot more confident going into the season, even if they don't get that Kessler, Duran, elite level center. If you at least get a tier 1 or tier 2 kind of wing, then maybe you could go a backup plan, at least for a little bit, for a center. But yeah, you can overpay a little bit, but you can't really afford to give up 2 first-round draft picks for anyone in my tier 2.
Before we move on to tier 3, we got this super chat from Jay Spares, who noted, Peyton Watson and Walker Kessler's injuries scare me, feels underestimated. I think with Kessler, there's been a ton of, to your point about tanking, like Utah pulls the plug in February or March every year. So the 2 previous years, I think they pulled the plug and they rested him down the stretch, as well as several of their other young guys. I also think with the shoulder injury, my understanding is he could have potentially played through it or put off the procedure. He was in a contract year. They were trying to tank anyway. I think they were like, all right, take the rest of the season off. So Kessler, I think some of it's been situational and circumstantial based on Utah. Watson, the hamstring thing is a real thing because he was supposed to be back for the playoffs. I think they anticipated going a bit further in the playoffs, but he didn't come back for the first round. And hamstring, we saw Aaron Gordon, J-Dub, Luka, obviously to close the year. those injuries are tricky, and the timetable is longer than you think. And with J-Dub and Gordon in particular, like those have been reoccurring injuries now. So there's some real risk there, but I don't know. Does it scare you off from either one of those guys, or how do you view their injury history?
Yeah, there's so much context missing, I feel like, with it too. How you mentioned with Kessler, maybe he could have came back, maybe he couldn't have. Maybe that's part of why he is a little bit back and forth with Utah if they held him out and are adding that into why they don't want to pay him. Not to get off topic, but it's really hard context missing. If they could play through injury, Watson, you got to think that he definitely knew that, hey, this is something that could hurt me. And if I don't look good come postseason time and I'm playing through a grade 2 hamstring injury, it's going to tank my value a bit. I'm trying to get paid. I'm 23, trying to get my first big contract. With that knowledge added in, I'm not too worried about it. Yes, hamstring issues are definitely a real thing, but given that he didn't recently, or not lately in the past month or two, had one, he's had some time off. He hasn't had a long injury history apart from that. I'm not too worried about it. Kessler, there's a little bit more compared to Watson, but not enough to completely scare me off of giving them a pretty sizable contract offer.
All right, let's go to tier 3, which is a short tier. And so for me, tier 3 is at the right price with an asterisk, and it says AKA a Denver first. So I am open to Christian Brown, for a first round pick. And I don't love the contract. I think it's an overpay. And I think even if he bounces back, it's still probably a slight overpay, though maybe he can live up to the billing of that contract. But I think we collectively have a short-term memory in terms of what players do and their value. And if you are good one season and then you are bad the next season, it's immediately like, well, this guy sucks. And I think we have enough of a sample size with him over 4 years where 3 of his 4 seasons, he's been a league average shooter or better. And those first 3 seasons, he went 36%, 38%, 40%. He's athletic. He is one of the best transition finishers in the league from the guard/wing position, like non-star edition. He is one of the best rebounding, like 2/3s in the league as well. He, again, a year removed from 15 points a game, 6 rebounds a game, 40% shooting on 3 with high level defensive metrics. Like this is, and even this year he ranked as an A+, was in the 97th percentile as a perimeter ISO defender. So I know it was a disappointing year overall. Did shoot 30% and 31% on catch and shoot threes. Did shoot 43% in the playoffs on catch and on threes against Minnesota for what that's worth. But he's a guy that, because Denver's in this compromised position, if you can't get Peyton Watson, it's not a great contract, but he's 24. I think if he was coming off of the 2 years ago versus this past year, you would be like, all right, that's not bad, especially if you're getting an asset for it. So under the condition that you get a first round pick for him and you just take him on into space, I would be open to this. But if Denver's like, nah, we're giving you a second, we're giving you a swap, we're just giving you the player, like take him, that's where I'm out. And I would probably put him below the rest of the tier just because of the contract. Like if this was just the player, I still would actually take him above everyone else in the next tier. But the contract is where the opportunity cost of paying him in the mid to high 20s is just too much for me.
Yeah. This one, I view it the same but different. I think if you contextualize it the way you did, contract aside here, he's the better player than Kelly Oubre, Lou Dort, Quentin Grimes, or Cam Johnson, debatably. But I feel like healthy, when last season before he got hurt back in 24-25, averaging like 15, 5, and 3-ish per game on 40% three-point shooting. Even then, he was like right there at his contract value, what he got. So yes, he had to play through a grade 2 ankle sprain, dealt with a calf injury, I think, too. It does scare me, the contract, enough to not put him in a tier 3, not comfortably above the rest of the tier 4 guys you list here. Even more so with that factoring in Denver. If they would compensate us enough, I would look past it. But at the end of the day, we're helping out a conference rival, a conference opponent that quite frankly, I'm a bit petty with. I'd like to get as much as I can from them.
It's fair.
Beat us twice in the postseason back in 23 and 24. But hey, if they would offer an unprotected first, that would change my mind a bit. The Lakers had the cap space. They could absorb it. They would still have maybe 25, 30 million left to work with, depending on the cap holds. You could talk me into it. I think he's a good player. I like the sneaky athletic ability. I like the 3-and-D potential if he can rebound. And he's a good timeline fit too. But just factoring in the contract, not trying to have short-term memory, but I do factor in this season a little bit too. Not quite comfortably above the guys that I would list, but yeah, I think you make good points with Christian Braun. It's ultimately compensation dependent.
Yeah, no, I mean, and so I also think there's an element of, and this could be wishful thinking, so entertain me for a second, but he's only making 21.6 or 55 next season. So I also wonder if this is and then 23 the following year. I wonder if this is a situation where you could rehab his value and then flip him, because again, I think if you some people thought his contract was a little bit too high coming off of the 2024-25 season, but I don't think people thought it was necessarily like egregious based on his performance. Mm-hmm. And so if he does have like a rehabilitation here over the next year or two, maybe it is a contract where you could flip it next summer, you could flip it the following summer, and he kind of retains that value to a degree on the market, but certainly some risk here. Like I think just straight up fit, he checks more boxes of that list that we were talking about earlier than the rest of the guys on this list. Because again, the larger sample size of 3-point shooting, the rebounding, the athleticism, the transition, cutting. I mean, we've seen how he fits with Jokic as a cutter. They could fit similarly with Luka. I just think there's a dynamism here that the other four guys don't quite have, which is why I have them in the flawed fits tier. But he does have the flawed fit of the contract, I think. And like, can he stay healthy, and can he shoot? Maybe it is a 1-year blip and he goes back to being the same shooter, or maybe it's a new trend of maybe he stabilizes more like a league average shooter, which to me would change the calculation. But the calculation was like, he's a clear, not even like plus defender, but like really good defender. He's shooting 38 to 40% on threes back-to-back seasons. He's a good rebounder. He's a good finisher. That's a valuable player. And so I get the shooting and the injuries, and I understand that the hesitation, but I think if they sweeten the pot with the first, and then you could flip that first for something else, I would potentially be interested in that. So what about tier 4 here? We got flawed fits. I have 7 Kelly Oubre, 8 Lou Dort, 9 Quentin Grimes, and 10 Cam Johnson, with a big honorable mention to Marcus Smart. Cam Johnson versus Marcus Smart, I think it's more just the talent play on Cam Johnson, because he's obviously not like the defender you want, but expiring contract, if you get him for free or an asset with him, I would be open to that. But how do you view this tier? Is there anyone you think is too high, too low? And is there anyone else you'd want to throw in here?
We're pretty similar. I only have one other guy that I would throw in. I would throw in Dean Wade, 6'9", 3-and-D guy. Not a guy that gets talked about much, not a well-known name, doesn't score very much, like 5.5 points per game. But with Luka Doncic, Austin Reeves, maybe LeBron optimistically back, you're not going to need much more scoring after that. Not the most elite 3-point shooter, 37% career, but is plus 40% on corner 3-point shots. Simply a catch and shoot guy, but you would be picking him up for the defensive value. 6'9", and he can be a wing stopper. He can even be a pretty solid point of attack defender. Back when New York and Cleveland matched up, he was the one defending Jalen Brunson. Nobody can obviously stop Brunson, but I thought Dean Wade did pretty good. Whether it's a guy like Brunson, the next night it might be a bigger wing that he might have to match up with, might be a Kawhi Leonard. He can take on a variety of matchups, and that's something the Lakers don't have. Ideally what Rui Hachimura could have been for them with the really good 3-point shooting and then defense added in. Obviously taking away Rui's scoring ability, Dean Wade ideally can kind of fit that mold, can kind of fit that role for a team. Around that maybe portion of a non-tax pyramid level, around that range for Dean Wade, that's somebody I'd throw in. But apart from that, I have Kelly Oubre at my 7 spot 2, if you're going 1 through 10. I'm surprised you actually haven't ranked that high too. Coming off a really good year, 36% from three, playing maybe the best defense he ever has. I was a bit shocked by the defensive metrics with Kelly Oubre. The matchup difficulty was high. The perimeter isolation defense was high. B-ball index, again, referencing. He had a really good year. Very athletic. He might be 30, but if you're talking about an elite athlete, they tend to age better. That's why I've had interest in Andrew Wiggins yet. Same thing with Kelly Oubre. Not worried about his athletic ability decline. Kelly, he'd be a target for me. I have Quentin Grimes after Kelly Oubre. He's so up and down. Like defensively, he might be great one game. The next game, it's like, do you care about playing defense? But didn't have the toughest overall matchup difficulty compared to the rest of the guys on the list here. Fell behind Lou Dort, Kelly Oubre, and Dean Wade in regard to matchup difficulty. Tougher than Cam Johnson, but yeah, I'd throw in Dean Wade for the tier 4 that maybe you don't have. Cam Johnson, he can move up higher for me. I have him at 9th, but he can move up higher depending on compensation. I even have a thought where I would maybe take back Cam Johnson over Christian Brown, depending on the same compensation. If they would give us kind of the choice between, hey, take Cam Johnson or Christian Brown for your first round pick, I think I might go Cam Johnson based off the contract. He's an expiring contract, not a long-term contract that you might be taking on a risk with. Better three-point shooter. That's the one thing that you know you're going to get from Cam. Unfortunately, can't be a true 3-and-D option, isn't a great defender. He's decent around average, but he's not going to be the toughest task defender on your team, isn't going to be able to replace Marcus Smart if they have to replace him. But a little bit more three-point optionality there with Cam Johnson. And then, again, maybe throwing in Dean Wade.
I like it. I think for me, I'm a little lower on Wade just because of the offense that, it's... I don't want to bring up like Jake LaRavia and Jared Vanderbilt because I think he's overall a better player than both those guys, but there is some shades of like a combination of both in terms of just sometimes like passing up open looks and like I think there's some similarity with when like Jake would go through those stretches where he's playing 16, 18, 20 minutes and he's taking like 2 shots and you're just like, dude, we know you're out there more for your defense, your rebounding, your motor, but you do need to shoot when you're open. And I feel like Wade has a little bit of that in his game where he's a solid shooter. He's an above average 3-point shooter. He's just such a low volume guy who I feel like is obsessed with shot quality that I like him as a high level, maybe like your top bench defensive wing. I don't know if I love go like him in that starting top role. And I think that was a limitation for Cleveland ultimately trying to, even though he did do well in the playoffs, I want to give him his credit. I think ultimately, if we're being completely honest here, I view Kelly Oubre, Lou Dort, and Quentin Grimes all as bench level guys on championship teams. And Lou Dort had what I think are 2 outlier seasons, shooting 41% on threes. The years before that, he was not a good shooter. The year since that, he's not been a good shooter. And I think, again, I like to look at multi-year trends and more of a larger sample size rather than just like one outlier season in either direction. So when Lou Dort was making 41% of his threes, he could start and they won the championship and he is of a certain utility. When he's shooting, I think he shot 30% on threes in the playoffs. You saw he started, but he was 8th in the team in minutes. He was benched in several second halves in terms of like coming off of the bench rather than starting after starting in the first half. And he frequently did not close games with AJ Mitchell, Alex Caruso, and Kason Wallace, closing over him. And I know OKC has like a plethora of defensive talent, so it's not really a fair comparison, but part of me would be like, it's kind of a throwaway from OKC that you would then be like propping up as your savior on the defensive end. That I think he's an elite defender. I think he's an all defense level guy. I just think he's really flawed offensively, where it's basically like if he can't make threes, he can't do anything else. Like he's a solid offensive rebounder, but he's not really a cutter. He's not going to attack a closeout. He can't dribble or pass. And it's just basically like he shoots wide open threes and he just either makes like above average percentage or he makes what he made last year. And so he has like almost no offensive utility to the point where I do view his ideal slotting as like that Dean Wade the top bench guy role. And I think OKC politically had to keep him in the starting group. But if you look at like the three guys I mentioned, not only closed over him, but they all played more minutes than him in the playoffs. So it's like they clearly were telegraphing like Lou Dort is of lesser importance. And I think moving forward next season, if they retain him, he's a bench guy. Oubre I view as a high level bench guy as well. Grimes I view as more of a six man scorer type. I think he's underrated defensively, but he's not a guy I would want to be a stopper. And if you also look at his defensive matchup data, he's primarily guarding point guards and shooting guards. So like all these guys we're talking about here, like Christian Brown 1-3, Kelly Oubre 1-3, and even some 4s. Lou Dort 1-5. Honestly, his matchup data is crazy. Cam Johnson 2-4. Quentin Grimes is the least versatile of these 5 guys and is like almost strictly just guarding backcourt guys. So that's another one where like, sure, he can maybe be your primary backcourt guy, but now you need another defender out there to be the forward guy, whereas these other guys have a certain amount of utility. So I honestly view all these guys as bench guys. And if you get any one of them, I would want to have it kind of be more by committee. I would not love any of these guys as like the starting option, but that might just be like, this is probably the most realistic range for LA in terms of, gettable guys here. 2 of these guys you can get free agency. One of these guys you could potentially trade for Dort. Cam Johnson is a starter in my opinion, but just not the defensive wing stopper. It's more a talent play, more you lose LeBron, you lose Rui. Can you slide in Cam Johnson to replace one of those guys in like a positional sense? And then Marcus, I think is to me like a $10 to $12 million guy, but it seems like he's going to Houston. So we don't really need to break that down. But in terms of like most money you'd pay for each of these guys, or in the case of Dort, it sounds like Johnson you'd take for a first. But would you do Johnson for not a first because it's an expiring? And like, what would you do for Dort? What would you do for Oubre? What would you do for Grimes?
Yeah, with Cam,
I have Wade too.
Yeah, sure. But for Cam, I have a little alternate price tag. Might be a little bit biased. I do a lot of draft talk on my channel, and I think a lot of my channel members and everything, we came to have a little bit of an affection for Trayvon Brazil, drafted by Denver. Maybe if they would throw him in, he technically was a part of their first round draft pick that they traded down. I think they traded 26 to 35 and then like 2 future second round picks. Maybe throw in Trayvon Brazil with Cam Johnson, getting a bigger athletic front court guy with Brazil. Are they ever NBA ready? Who knows? But you could maybe entice me with that. Maybe the Lakers aren't as high on him as I am, but that could be something. Maybe another second round draft pick with him. I'd probably take it for slightly less than a unprotected first. I don't think they'd probably give it for Cam, but that would probably be my baseline what I'd take him back for and help them out too. For Quentin Grimes, I have him around 12 to 13 million at the most. I wouldn't give him more than a 2, maybe 3-year contract if the third year is a team option or partially guaranteed. He's had good moments, but I feel like he's more of a opportunistic scoring option guy with when players got hurt in Philadelphia back in 2024-25, he looked really good. He's looked good when, not saying playing for bad teams, but at moments when he's in a bigger role that he probably would fill on a good team. And then, like you pointed out too, he's not really a wing stopper, more of a point of attack guy, defending 1s and 2s, a few smaller 3s here and there, but the defensive consistency with him comes and goes too. For Kelly Oubre, he's a little bit older, even though I like the production output more than Quentin Grimes, but factoring in the age and the outlook, not quite a perfect timeline fit. I would value him at around 10 million per year, up to a 2-year contract. I'd probably do 2 years, 22 million, 10 million year number 1, 11 year number 2. Maybe he'd take that, maybe he wouldn't. Philadelphia's had him quietly for nearly half a decade now, 3-4 years. So might be tough to take him away from them. For Lou Dort, OKC, they're trying to get under the second apron officially yet. If we would offer purely a second round draft pick, the Lakers only have 1 to offer. I wouldn't throw in a first round draft pick. That would be a no-go. I don't really think they'd want Connect or LaRavia. Maybe they would with a second round pick, but I wouldn't offer too much more than that. And then for Dean Wade, probably around 10 million per year as well. 29 years old, a little bit younger than Kelly Oubre, a little bit older than Quentin Grimes and Lou Dort. Again, the offensive output, kind of like how you said too, isn't going to be much of a scoring threat, but I do value the big versatile defense, bigger than a Lou Dort, bigger than every other target in that tier 4.
I like it. I think we're pretty close. I'd probably go a little bit higher on Oubre just because I do have Oubre over Dort, so I'd rather, if it's even like Oubre at like 13 million per year, I'd rather have that than Dort on 17. Plus, you're gonna have to figure out, are you extending him or what's that looking like? And then you also have to give up an asset probably to get him. I don't think OKC is going to help out the Lakers and just dump him on the Lakers. I think if they dump him anywhere, it'll be Brooklyn or Chicago, and they'll help out an Eastern Conference rival, similar to what they did with Aaron Wiggins and Isaiah Joe, although they actually got 2 second-round picks in both of those transactions. So I think if the Lakers are actually prying Lou Dort, they're probably going to have to give up an asset. I would not give up a first. Again, a second, to your point, probably not enough, but I don't know. I'd throw in a second and connect, or I don't even really want to throw in a swap, because a swap might, they'll probably actually use that. Like the whole point of a swap is you want to be betting against the other team's future, and so if I'm OKC, that's a win for them. So I would. That's where Dort, especially now, if he was an unrestricted free agent, it'd be a different story. But now that they exercise the team option, for me, it's the battle between like his defense versus the limitations on the contract and the context. So Oubre, I think I'd go 2 years, 26, maybe even somewhere in that range, somewhere 13 AAV. Again, depending on what you do at the center spot. Grimes, I'm pretty low. I would say I almost didn't have Grimes on this list, and then I had to like talk myself into it because I just view him as 6-man type. I don't think or starter if you have a certain amount of defense and size around him. But I think for what the Lakers are going to have, like, it's just, he's probably going to be in a role that he's not optimally suited for. So I don't know, 224. I don't even know. He's a guy that I don't know, 220, but you're not getting Quentin Grimes for 220. So that's why I'm probably out on Grimes, but I think, if I'm being objective here, this is where I would have him. And then Cam Johnson, I would love a first, but if you don't get it at first, I'd want at least like a second or a swap or something. And then, that's at least an expiring.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you kind of hit it on the head with all the targets here. None of them for me are starter ideally either. Funny enough, all of them kind of were a starter for their team other than Quentin Grimes off and on. Kelly Oubre started quite a bit for Philadelphia. Lou Dort did for OKC. Didn't finish much for them, especially during the latter part of their playoff run. Cam started for Denver. Ideally, you'd have most of them come off the bench. 6-man for most of them, Kelly Oubre, Cam, and Quentin. I agree with that. Can the Lakers afford to be that picky? I'm not entirely sure they can, especially if they do go the center route. If they somehow get Kessler, they probably would have to settle for one, if not 2 tier 4 guys to start by Luka and Austin. It wouldn't be the perfect world situation. I'd much rather have somebody that we talked about in tier 1 or tier 2, but it wouldn't be the absolute worst outcome. Hey, maybe something changes and they retain Marcus Smart. He doesn't go to Houston, and then they pick up another guy with him. Ideally, you'd have to be more of an offensive producer at that point, but it all depends on how they prioritize the front court compared to the wing and the back court to me. Ideally, you could get them for the prices we talked about, but you might have to overpay here and there a little bit, and you might have to compromise on who you pick from your tier 1, 2, 3, or 4 to be in that starting lineup by Luka and Austin.
To recap, we had, roughly similar tiers, but tier 1 franchise cornerstones, Peyton Watson. Tier 2 ideal starters, Herb Jones, Tari Eason, PJ Washington, Derek Jones Jr. You had Eason 2 over Herb, and Herb at 3, and then this tier 3. So where did you have Christian Brown? Do you just have him in a giant tier with these guys, or where would you slot him overall?
I did make it one giant tier. I couldn't quite talk myself into making a tier 3 between all these guys. I put them in
tier 3 is just blank.
Yep, pretty much.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, it is a pretty. steep drop off, in my opinion, from that tier 2 into this next tier. And again, Christian Braun, I think it's more so the contract. So do you have him over Oubre?
I actually have Oubre one spot ahead of Christian Braun.
Okay.
And I put an asterisk by it depending on compensation. Kind of how I mentioned again, what you would get back for Brown or Johnson. Maybe you could flip flop them, but yeah, it's just so draft compensation dependent for them.
It's tough. Yeah, I think I would take if it's not a first, because I think they're gonna have to attach something to him most likely, and whether that's a second or a swap or whatever. If it's not a first, I'd probably put him behind Oubre. But honestly, like the post Oubre part of the list for me is where it starts to fall off. Where I just don't. I think Lou Dort's not good enough offensively. Quentin Grimes isn't good enough defensively. Cam Johnson isn't good enough defensively. And then, Dean Wade, I don't think is good enough offensively. We'll close with this before we get into the Q&A. Where are you at with Marcus in terms of, I think a big sticking point right now within the negotiation is that second year versus the third year. And the Lakers would prefer to give him a 2-year deal. Houston's pushing for a third year, which I think right now is the tiebreaker. But if the AAV was somewhere in like the $8 to $10 million range, so let's just say, let's even go a little conservative here and say, I don't know, 3 years, 24, 3 years, 25. That's similar price range to Oubre and Grimes, but one extra year. So it's actually less AAV. Would you rather just pay Marcus Smart and hope that you get like a solid 2 good years out of him, and then that third year might be a little rough? Or would you rather pay like the additional money of, I think Oubre will be somewhere in that 10 to 15. Grimes might be a full non-taxer MLE because of his offensive game. Dort is already locked in at 17. Johnson's at 21. Like, from an opportunity cost standpoint, you could potentially be getting Smart for half, if not even less than all of these guys. But you're risking the third year there. Like, how do you view that calculus?
Yeah, if they could do the conservative route, I wouldn't mind a 3-year deal. Leading up to the latest reports on Houston kind of offering him that and enticing him with a longer term contract, I've always talked about it from a 2-year standpoint. I think that would be the ideal length of the contract that LA would give him. But yeah, if you could go the conservative route, I'd be open to it at $8 million per year. Like you said, 3 years, 24, 25 million. Yeah, I would prefer that. I think there's something to be said for team continuity, the leadership that Marcus brings to the team. Luka's spoken highly about it. LeBron's spoken highly about it. I think they've missed that for a while. A few comments on my channel even pointed out that while Luka's obviously the best player on the team loves him, he's maybe not the vocal leader that he would like to be quite yet. So retaining Smart could help him be that voice in the locker room, carry the team from a vocal standpoint, keep everyone on the same page. Year 3 might be a little bit rough. You never know. There's durability concern with Marcus, the injury issues that he had back in Memphis. But yeah, I think I would go that route if you could go conservative at 3 years, 24, 25. I'd probably prefer him over Dort, Quentin Grimes, Cam Johnson, depending on compensation, and kind of right up there with Kelly Oubre, depending on price too.
I agree. So looking at the room exception max, it starts off at 9.4, and you could do a max of 3-year deal, 29.7 million. So yeah, if you got him for a 3-year room exception and you didn't even have to use your cap, again, I would want that lower. I would want it more mid-20s than close to 30. But if you got him in a mid-20s deal, whether it was a 2-year deal or a 3-year deal, I'd be okay with that, just based on the value here. And I agree. I think he's a better offensive player than Dort. I think he's a better defender than Grimes and Johnson. So I think he's closer to provide. I mean, I don't know. Grimes is a tough one. It really depends on the really night with Grimes. But let's Torius CRG, thank you for the super chat. My 2 favorite Laker guys. Great day indeed. Appreciate that. Shout out Notorious CRG. Shibugan, thank you for the super chat. JSM has a face. Who knew? I appreciate you showing your face on here.
Yeah, I do some live streams, but not quite as much as you. Began with the Faceless channel, and I think that's what a lot of people know me for. But yeah, first time seeing me, welcome.
Ryan Lucas asks, what's the deal with Bronny's option? Is it guaranteed? My understanding is Bronny's option is guaranteed, and they only would have had a formal announcement if they had waived him. So yes, to my understanding, Bronny's option was, or it wasn't technically an option. It was just a guaranteed date. They did not waive him, so it's guaranteed. Next one from the real SP3 Trum 602. Thank you for the super chat. Trade DK and Vando for Brown and pick. I assume this is Pickett. Then user cap space to get Kessler. Still have a few bucks to sign some players back. Thoughts? What do you think of DK and Vando for Christian Brown and Pickett?
I think they let Jalen Pickett go, if I seen that correctly earlier today. I don't know if he means Pickett or a draft pick. I could be wrong about that. That might I seen
they
that
did
floating
decline.
around.
Okay, so then it probably is pick.
It could be.
It was just capitalized, so I wondered if it was a nickname. But yeah, you're right.
Yeah, but DK and Vando for Brown, and then use your cap space to get Kessler. That'd be a cost-effective, or maybe not cost-effective, but interesting cap space route to address both the wing and center. If it would get Kessler, even though it's not really directly intertwined with it, I'd be all for it. Depending on the pick they get back for Christian Brown, would it be a first round pick? Would it be a pick swap? Hard to kind of decipher with that, but I would say maybe. But if you're getting Kessler, you can talk me into a bunch of different scenarios.
I do really like the idea of adding, especially in like this type of deal where maybe they don't want to give up the first round pick. If you are taking on a potential negative contract, which I would say Christian Brown or like Miles Turner, in my opinion, those type of contracts, if you're not giving me a first, I need to dump Vando in the deal. Like it's one or the other. So maybe this ends up being like Christian Brown in a second, but then you're offsetting part of his incoming salary with DK and Vando, which is almost 17 million. So Brown's making 21. You're actually taking on just 4 million out of your cap space. And then with Kessler, let's just say 35 AAV, you still have 10 to 14 million or so to play with, depending on the final numbers there. And obviously 35 AAV could be starting out 30, 31 or whatever in year one. So you could actually have more. You could be closer to almost 20 million or so. So yeah, I mean, this is, again, depending on the compensation, and I like that. Next one from Notorious CRG. I think of a super chat. Do Carr and Thero fit into this conversation at all?
Yeah,
I don't think as starters.
No, definitely not.
As bench pieces, yes.
Yeah, I would say they could slot into maybe 8, 9, or 10 in the rotation. I would say Carr is a pretty good bet to do that. Do they view Carr as a wing or more of a point of attack defender guy, more of a guard? He's got the length and the athletic ability of a wing, but he's a little bit light yet. I think he weighed in at 185-ish. Might be tough to view him that way. Adu Thero, that's such a toss-up for me. Is he going to be competent enough offensively in your number 2 to be a rotation guy? Ideally, that'd be great. Defensively, if he could be a little bit more, I don't want to say locked in, but kind of the awareness is a bit better. That would be great to have too. I think they'll both get a shot, but I think one definitely will, maybe both.
J-Rod notes, I'm a big fan of 2-player trades. I think that helps us the most, like a Misi and Bay package return at a cost of a swap and a second is good value. So you retain, you don't give up a first, you give up a swap and a second. I do think they want a first at least for Misi. I mean, the New Orleans asking prices are out of control. And then the irony is like they did the Derek Queen trade where they got swindled, and it's like that. Since then, it's been an overcorrection of now the market for them is just completely out of whack. But I like this. I just think Misi and Bay, to me, Misi has a starter potential, but I don't know if like from day one or this year he can be that solve for the Lakers. And then Sadiq Bey to me is like high level bench off, like does have some 2-way utility, but to me, not a starter, not the answer on the wing in terms of that wing stopper type. But I think Sadiq Bey could be like a 7th or 8th man, depending on her construct. And Misi is either high level backup or fringy starter.
Yeah, I think you worded that one pretty well. Misi, I feel like you really can't give up that price because you have your backup already with Jackson Hayes. I think they'll bring him back anyway. And then Sadiq Bey, good bench piece, but unless you don't bring back Rui and LeBron, not really a big need for it. I'd prioritize a little bit more defensive minded at that point. So probably not worth the price.
We had BT Kingsley noted 2 of tier 4 is better than 1 or tier 2. So I don't know who you're referring to. If you want to follow up in the chat, I know people love Quentin Grimes, and I'm not one of those people. And I'm guessing it could be Dort as the other one. I think Dort and Grimes are the 2 that were probably lower than consensus on.
Yeah, that could be. Like I kind of pointed out before too, when Quentin Grimes had that latter part of, I think, 24-25, a lot of people remember that. If you put up a lot of points, you're probably going to stand out more, going to get more highlights on Twitter X. But some nights he might be in that tier 2. I agree with you, though. There might be a night where he's in the tier 5, tier 4 category. It might depend on the night. But yeah, it could be Dort, could be Grimes. Maybe if you're a Cam Johnson fan, that might be one too.
And a couple more here before we wrap. Morning Spring notes. JSM looks like if Laravia and Buha had a kid. I don't know if you should be offended or flattered. Hopefully flattered, but yeah, we're getting a lot of comments about us looking alike in the chat.
I've gotten that before in my live streams before too. I don't know if we share some 23andMe ancestry, but apparently some people think so. It could be worse. I'll take the compliment.
There we go. And then Aldrich, we got several of these Kuminga questions. Where are you at with Kuminga? Because I noted him, if we go back, he was in my Unrealistic Wings as a footnote of just, I think he's a 4, and I don't think he's good enough defensively to do the job. So if the Lakers construct the roster where you potentially lose LeBron and or Rui, and you need a new 4, like Kuminga does check the box with offensive upside, some shot creation, athleticism, rebounding. I don't think he's the shooter that you want. He's been a below average 3-point shooter 4 of his 5 years. I also don't think he's the defender that you want as like the wing stopper. So if you're revamping the starters around Luka and Austin, and he's the worst of the 3 guys you're putting in there, and he's like willing to accept a certain role, I'm more open to it. If he's expecting to come in, be the star, like, or be like the 3rd guy, or you're slotting him in that, like, you're the new wing stopper, you're the new Marcus, I just don't think that's within his repertoire. So I'm in on Kuminga in a very specific context. I'm probably lower on him than consensus, but if you can protect him with a wing defender and center and get him to buy into a certain role as like, you're a role player, you're not a star, I'm cool with that. If it's like he still thinks he's on the ascent at a certain level and is going to be like a 20-point scorer in LA, I just don't think that's in the cards for him. So yeah, but where are you at with Kuminga?
Yeah, kind of same thing. He got that team option declined a little bit late today, so I had to think about, do I put him in that tier 4? And ultimately,
I thought about
kind of with yeah, I did too. But with what you're going through, there are too many ifs, in my opinion. If he can commit to the role, if he can buy in and do this or that, if he can be the fit that the Lakers envision, I see what they like in him. They were linked to him quite a lot at the trade deadline. The timeline fit, the athletic ability, the upside. But I think at the end of the day, there's too many ifs for me to put him in that tier 4.
I agree. And then final one here from Sunny Styles 420. What does JSM stand for?
They're just my initials. I wasn't very creative when I made a channel name, but it got too big enough for me to change it.
Well, this was fun, man. I appreciate you. Shout out to Sardeezy for watching the World Cup and our live. But JSM, this was Jaron. I'll call you by your name. This was fun, man. Thank you for rocking with me for a little over an hour here. I have you tagged in the show notes below. So anyone looking for your channel or your X account is on there. But anything you want to plug before we get out of here?
YouTube channel, JSM. That's my name again. Not too much, but had a great time. Appreciate you letting me on. Been a fan of the show for some time now. You've done a great job. You've come a long way in a short time on YouTube too. A lot of support for you. I see comments on my channel all the time that you should link up with Jovan. You should link up with Jovan. You two look alike, so you got to make it happen. So you reached out, and I was more than happy to do it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, let's have a check-in. Let's have a check-in in the next few weeks once the Lakers have made some of these moves.
Yeah, definitely. Looking forward to it. Hopefully we have a lot to talk about.
I think we will. All right, man. I'm going to answer a few more questions. So I'm going to say bye to you, and then I will get into a few more super chats. But thank you again, and we'll talk soon. All right. I'm going to go a little bit longer here. See, the next one is Christian Ferris 4594. Thank you for the super chat. What's our competition for Kessler? The Jazz. I mean, technically, depending on how high it gets, Brooklyn could get involved, or as long as it's under a certain number. Brooklyn, if it's in like the mid to potentially high 30s, Brooklyn could make a competitive offer for Kessler that I assume the Lakers would probably match, depending on how high it goes. But as of right now, it's Utah matching, or Brooklyn's the only team that could really get there. Like Chicago, if they clear some space, maybe the Clippers, depending on what happens with their situation, but they just picked up the team option on Brook Lopez today. So I would say that it's basically Kessler returns to the Jazz or he goes to the Lakers. Now, can there be some insane like 3-team sign and trade between Detroit, Utah, and Sacramento, and Kessler goes to Detroit? I know for Laker fans, you're hoping I did not just speak that into existence, but I guess there could be some game of musical chairs where, I mean, Sabonis doesn't really make sense in Utah, but I guess if you were to construct a front line to protect Sabonis, I think it would be something like Triple J is like the ideal Sabonis front court partner at the 4, because he makes up for his defensive limitations with elite rim protection, defensive versatility, the wingspan, the length, all that stuff. So I think that plus Markkanen at the 3, they could somewhat protect some of Sabonis's limitations, but that's just a monster contract that I wouldn't want to take on. So technically, I guess if they expand a potential Detroit, Sacramento sign and trade, you could add in Utah and send Sabonis to Utah, send Kessler to Detroit, and Duren to Sacramento. That's one option. But I think realistically, it's just a matter of like, does Utah match the Lakers? Here we go. BT Kingsley, thank you for the clarification. Luka and Grimes have history, plus Collins and Kellyo is solid. I like Collins and Kellyo together. I actually think that among the John Collins, has probably been my biggest riser in terms of my personal free agent targets. I was not really seeing the vision, but I think especially, I think he only makes sense in the context of you lose LeBron and you're not making Rui your starting 4, or not trying to slot Rui at the 3. Maybe there's a scenario where you could add Collins, Kelly Oubre, and Rui, depending on the final numbers across those 3 guys and how much you have left over for the center spot. But I do like Kelly Oubre and Quentin Grimes. I mean, if we want to pull up for a second here, so we were looking at those 2 guys. So I want 1 for 2. I thought it was Grimes and Dort you were talking about, not Oubre. If we could say like Christian Brown put to the side because of the contract and whatnot. If we look at those 2 guys in relation to these 4, each of these guys to me is like at least, I would say actually, to me, Herb Jones, Tari Eason, and Derek Jones Jr. are 2 tiers above Quentin Grimes, wherever you want to slot Quentin Grimes. And PJ Washington, I'd say like a tier above him. But to me, we could talk percentiles. I'd rather talk grades. Like Quentin Grimes is more of a B to B minus defender and only guards. Whereas Herb Jones, Tari Eason, and Derek Jones Jr., I think are all between A minus to A defenders and all have a spectrum of at least 1 through 3. And I think even in the case of Tari Eason, 1 through 4. And then PJ Washington is also, I would classify him more as like a B plus ish defender, and then he's more 3 through 5. So I think the defensive side, which to me is the most important thing on my checklist, if we go back, like the most important thing is perimeter defense, because the Lakers are at a deficit with Luka and Austin. You need to offset that even more than shooting. I think that's partly why when I was comparing Herb versus Tari, like I just think that I care more about the defensive fit, and that's where I give Herb a slight edge. But you could say that Tari's shooting and rebounding gives him the edge. But I don't. And then comparing them to Kelly Oubre, I wouldn't say it's as big of a gap. I view Oubre as more in that B to B plus range, so like a little bit above, closer to PJ Washington, I guess. But I think PJ Washington's a better defender. Maybe I'm a little too low on PJ. Maybe PJ is like an A minus, and these other three guys are like A's. But Herb Jones, A plus perimeter ISO defender in the top 97th percentile. Tari Eason's an A. Derek Jones Jr. is an A. PJ, I think, is an A minus. Like, I just think these guys are at a different level than Quentin Grimes and Kelly Oubre. Now, offensively, I think Quentin Grimes is the best pure scorer, bucket getter of this tier. But I don't think that's necessarily what you want around Luka and Austin. If you go by catch and shoot, which I think is the second most important thing after defense, like I would say like athleticism and motor. I think all these guys have him beat in that, especially in bigger bodies. Herb Jones, 6'5", 6'6", Tari Eason, 6'7", 6'8", PJ Washington, 6'7", 6'8", Derek Jones Jr., 6'6", Quentin Grimes is 6'4", and Derek Jones makes up for that with a massive over 7 foot wingspan with his vertical. So I just think these guys are more physically imposing. They're bigger, they're longer, they have more defensive utility, and they're also, I think, just more of what the Lakers need, and not Quentin Grimes. I still think is a guy who's best with the ball in his hands to a degree, and that's why I view him more as like a six man. Now Kelly Oubre, you can make more of a case for. I think ultimately the age is the difference here, where Herb Jones, Tari Eason, they're in their mid 20s, PJ Washington, DJJ in their late 20s. Kelly Oubre is 31. So if you're signing him to at least a 2-year deal, it's taking you to 33. If you sign a 3-year, it's taking you to 34. It's just he's a little bit older, where these guys, I think, fit a longer term timeline. So Kelly Oubre is the one that I would say for me maybe has like the strongest pull. And if we go back to this, if you don't get the first round pick for Christian Brown, that's where I slide him down and have all these guys in a similar tier. And then I think it's a coin flip between Brown being 7 years younger than Kelly Oubre, but being on a worse contract. And that's its own conversation. C27OL, thank you for super chat. Do you ever get sick of stupid questions? There's no such thing as a stupid. There's probably a couple that I've, felt that way, but in all seriousness, like I like to think of myself as a man of the people. I like to think of myself as someone who, now I've talked about this before, but I think a lot of media just like turns their nose up at the audience, and I've tried to structure the show around interacting with the audience. Like, obviously I have the opening segments and I break down the things I want to talk about, but then once I talk about what I want to talk about, I want to get into the Q&A and interact with you guys. So I don't think troll questions are obviously stupid, but like assuming the person has legitimate intentions and there's like an actual curiosity behind the question, then I'm open to just about anything, as long as it's, again, not like a troll question or not try to put me in a compromising position. So yeah, I mean, of course I like some questions better than others. I'm not going to deny that, but I like all questions. BT Kingsley, thank you for super chat. Walker Kessler is going to get exposed by speed, need enforcer. So I think Kessler is actually more mobile than people realize. Like, I think Gobert is like the easiest Kessler comparison because they're very similar in terms of the size, the overall like archetype. But I actually think like Gobert has underrated mobility with playing on the perimeter. And like, I mean, we saw that in the 2025 series against the Wolves. Gobert switched on to Luka and Austin, and he was holding his own for the most part in a lot of those one-on-one matchups. So I think, Austin was dealing with the toe thing. Luka wasn't in the shape that he was in this past season, and he obviously had the game 3 stuff. So it was like those guys weren't in their peak form necessarily, but still Rudy Gobert held up. I think Walker Kessler is more mobile than Rudy Gobert. And that's part of the appeal for me of like, he's not the all world, like all time rim protector that Gobert is, but he can give you, I think 85% and with the upside to maybe give you 90%, 92%, something like that. But then he's like a similar level rebounder. He's way more skilled offensively, in my opinion, with his variety of hook shots and finishes around the basket, his hands, the 3-point range he started to show last season. And I just think he has far more utility and skill offensively. But in terms of speed in particular, like, look, every player has a weakness. So if you want to pick on Walker Kessler and be like, yeah, he's not the most switchable big, sure, but I think he's going to be top 5 in blocks and top 5 in defensive rebounds. And the list of big men that could do that it's Wemby, it's Rudy Gobert. Where's the other guy? Maybe there's someone I'm not thinking of, but that's a pretty short, 80 a couple of years ago, right? Like it's a very short list of guys who can be that level of both rim protector. That's not even getting into like rim field goal percentage allowed, all that stuff, on off defensive splits, whatever. There's like that side of it. There's also the defensive rebounding side of it. So sure, is this the one weakness that Walker Kessler probably has defensively? Yes. But I would also say, like, I've watched tape on him defending Jokic, and he defends Jokic similarly to Gobert, of just really leveraging his size and like absorbing Jokic shoulder bumps and post-ups. And like, he's blocked Jokic several times going back to the film from 2 seasons ago. So I get what you're saying, but like, so for example, let's contrast this. Like Jalen Duren, right, would probably fit. He's quicker. He's more athletic. He's quicker. And if you want to say like enforcer, Jalen Duren is, he's probably stronger, more physically imposing than Walker Kessler, right? But Jalen Duren can struggle with some of, we saw it in the playoffs, just some of the defense limitations with him. I think the big thing is just like, he's not the level of rim protector that you want. And you see that in the defensive playmaking numbers, but you also see that in Detroit's field goal percentage allowed at the rim. And like, I just think there's a gap there where, okay, well, Walker might not be as quick as a guy like Jalen Duren, but he's going to both protect the rim and also prevent just guys. They're going to see him in there, and he is at a certain level where guys aren't going to try him as much as they do the average big. So I think that's where Duren, I'm only bringing up Duren because obviously they're in somewhat of a competition as like the top center on the market, at least from like an LA perspective. But certainly Kessler has got some, but I also say like, who's the guy that's fast that also is an enforcer? Because those things often, like if you're a fast big, you're typically a skinny big with a certain amount of athleticism that doesn't always come with the being an enforcer. So I guess Duren is one of the ones who can combine that power with the speed, but I think he's got some paint protection limitations and just some rotation limitations. So I just don't think he's in the same class as Kessler, to say nothing of then bringing up guys like Gobert, Wemby, the top rim protectors. Like, to me, he's more of a B-level rim protector, which is still good, still better than DeAndre Ayton. DeAndre Ayton's probably a C-, D+ rim protector. So like he's better than that, but he's not quite the level that you need. PBKDR, really like this question. Thank you for the super chat. What about Zaire Williams for vet min off the bench? So he is someone that in retrospect, I wish I had on my free agent bargains list. I was pretty surprised that they did not pick up the team option. I thought it was a relatively low and team friendly number, and they chose not to. So yeah, I would love Zaire Williams. And so depending on like, it depends on the construction of the roster overall, but especially for a min and the fact that the Lakers are probably going to have 2 to 4 vet min players, depending on if they get off some money, I think Zaire Williams is worth an upside swing as a guy who has developed into a solid 3-point shooter, and I think is a solid multi-positional defender. I'm pulling up his shooting from this past season. So this past year, solid might have been a little generous. He did shoot 34%. So he's slightly below league average. I guess that's like one of the limitations here is he's not quite the knockdown shooter you want, but he's impressively, I mean, he has taken a leap as a shooter. If you look at his first 3 years, he was a lower volume shooter between 26 and 31%. The past 2 years, he's leveled up in terms of his volume and increased to 34% back-to-back years. So not quite the shooter you want, but for a vet minimum guy, you're not getting a perfect player. I think there's some defensive playmaking upside with the steal rate. Rebounding for an athletic wing is a little underwhelming. He rebounded better a couple years ago, but that seems to be an outlier. But yeah, I like him overall. Looking at, like the turnover rate is higher than the assist rate, which is a little concerning. Like there's some limitations with him. He's overall a below average. He's kind of below average on both sides of the ball, which is partly why they rejected the team option. I think he does kind of exist in theory a little bit more than in reality, but he's primarily played small forward throughout his career. Has started to play a little bit more power forward, but is more of a 3 who can play some 2 and then occasionally some 4. And if you look at his shooting, finishing has declined the last couple of years. Used to be in the mid to high 70s, now is in the mid to high 60s. Has a, developing mid-range game and floater game based on some of his numbers, and shot 34% on corner threes. So not great, but for a min guy, like he's an upside swing guy that I would take for the min. That's someone I'd be interested in, but anything more, I think that's probably too much for him. But if you're viewing him as like a fringe rotation guy that can maybe pop and you're taking a swing, I like that. BT Kingsley, thank you for the super chat. Kelly O, Collins, Robert Williams III, Buddy, Isaac, Keon, Matisse, Luke, Jax. Is this the bench, or is this just guys you want the Lakers to sign / re-sign in the case of Luke and Jackson? Well, Buddy Hield, they picked up his team option. Isaac is out there. I like Isaac in the context of if you get rid of Vando, if you get off Vando in some sort of salary dump trade, Isaac I like as a minimum replacement for Vando. And they're very similar players. I think Isaac's probably the better defender right now between the two, and is also more of a rim protector. He's a little bit bigger and longer than Vando. So Vando's probably better when Vando's more of a, I think, wing defender who can guard down and be that point of attack guy. Isaac's more of a wing defender who can guard up and be that like rim protecting big forward. So I think Vando's probably a little bit better with the guards. Isaac, though, I think overall is better defender, better defensive playmaker. So if you could swap out Vando and just replace him with Isaac for a minimum, I would consider that. Buddy Hield, I don't think, because of the team option, I mean, technically it could be available, but I don't think you need Buddy and Luke. That's too much overlap with defensive limitation. And then Kelly and Collins, I think that's at least like high 20s, if not 30-ish million combined AAV. Robert Williams, I think, is going to be around 10. I think the market might be a little bit lower for him, which would be a positive for the Lakers. But say 10, that's about 40. Then I think Isaac, Keon, and Matisse might all be minimum guys. Keon or Matisse might be a little bit above minimum. And then, Jax is probably in that $5-6 million range. So you could fit this. I would personally still I'd rather get the Watson or Kessler and then add Collins or something like that. And I would rather, because I still view, to me, if we're being honest here, like I think all these guys are bench players with the exception of John Collins. And that's where I'm like, you're still kind of in a situation where I think you're starting guys who aren't really, Like, I think in your configuration, it would be what? Robert Williams, Collins, Oubre, Luka, Austin. I think Oubre is a fringe starter, and I don't think Robert Williams is a starter. So that's where I think you're still a little bit short. Now, maybe if you still have DA, he's the placeholder starter, then you close with Robert Williams, and then Jackson is the insurance. And then your bench, again, putting Buddy to the side, you have Jake, Isaac, Keon, Matisse, Luke. Probably not in that order. Let's maybe reverse that order. It's like Luke, Matisse, Keon, Jake, Isaac, and then the big. Meh. I think they got to go a little bigger fish hunting. I think if you walk out of this offseason with Kelly Oubre and John Collins as your two prizes, that's pretty underwhelming from a Luka perspective, and just like the promise. They promised Luka a lot this summer, and I don't think that's delivering on a lot personally. And then final couple here. Adam Scrivs, thank you for the super chat. Sign and trade Mitch Robin Vando to Utah for Kessler. You cannot sign and trade a player. I think this would have to be, if my understanding of the cap is correct, this would have to be technically a sign and trade between the Lakers, the Knicks, and the Jazz. I don't think you can sign and trade a player on behalf of another team. I think you could only sign and trade your own players that you have the rights to, if I'm not mistaken. So they don't have the rights to Mitchell Robinson, so they couldn't sign and trade him, and that would not make sense, or not make sense, like not be eligible or legal. That was the word I was looking for. So yeah, they cannot sign a unrestricted free agent that they do not have the rights to, and sign and trade them. That would, like, if the second they sign Mitchell Robinson, he cannot be traded for 6 months. That would be the rule. Reeves Strongest Soldier, thank you for the super chat. Tomorrow's either peak or I'm getting drunk. Well, you have Austin locked up, so for you it's peak at a minimum. But yeah, we'll see. I'm prepared for the unexpected. That's going to be a fun one tomorrow and the next day. I say tomorrow and Wednesday are going to be fun. C72, excuse me, 07 or OL. I can't read. Thank you for super chat. Could Lakers trade Vando in 2 seconds for Jalen Smith and Mo Gay and waive Mo Gay? I don't know if you have seconds to trade. Not a Lakers fan. Got you. Lakers have 1 second to trade. It's their 2033. And I'm pretty sure, did they pick up Mo Gay's? So they picked it up, right? If I'm not, I'm just double checking here. Yeah, they did. Okay, they picked it up 4 days ago. Yeah, you could do something. Well, hold on 1 second. I was like, Jalen Smith is on Chicago, so I'm confused about this part of this. I was like, wait, yeah. So, I mean, you have two different, okay. Well, Lakers have 1 second and Jalen Smith and Mo Gay are on the same team. So I guess if you're doing a 3-team trade dump here, maybe that you're dumping Vando in Chicago, and then there's got to be something going to Atlanta in this case. But I mean, you could just do Vando for Jalen Smith. Pastor D, final one. Thank you for the super chat. Yo, any thoughts on Jonathan Isaac waived and the wing that Nets just waived? So I did just talk about both guys. If you want to get into, like, the thing with Jonathan Isaac is he's made of glass. He has played over 58 games twice in his entire career. And the last 4 years, after missing 2 years due to injury, his games are 11, 58, 71, 52. Now, that doesn't sound too bad, right? Especially the last 3, 58, 71, 52. However, he's been 16 minutes, 15 minutes, 10 minutes. So he's basically, they've kept him in bubble wrap compared to, like, first 3 years of his career, he was a starter. He's playing in the 20s minutes wise, 20 minutes, 27, 29. He's just not that same guy anymore. And he just shifted into a completely different role in his career. The thing that's held him back is he is not a shooter. He's a career 32% 3-point shooter, but particularly since his injuries, he's not been the same. Last 2 years, shot 26% and then 18% on threes. So, I mean, that's like, he has to play the 5, basically. Like it's a similar thing to Vando. It's what I bring up with Vando is like, they have to play the 5 on offense because there's such limited shooters that you can't play them 1 through 4. You can't have a shooter that bad 1 through 4 on the floor unless you have a stretch big. Like he could be the big if you have a stretch big, but otherwise he has to play the 5. But then, you're also trying to leverage his perimeter versatility in different positions and stuff. So he's a unique fit because it's like you want him to play like the 3-4 defensively, but then he needs to play the 5 offensively. So it takes a certain roster, a certain defensive scheme, a certain type of construction to, I think, maximize him. If you look at the play-by-play, I mean, yeah, he's exclusively played basically 4 and 5 the last 2 years. So I don't have his matchup, position data right in front of me, but I would assume it's primarily front court guys. So I like him on, like, I think both guys would be minimum guys. I would take a flyer on either one of them. Isaac, I would only specifically take a flyer on if you get rid of Vando. I don't think you could have another defensive wing / big who can't shoot in your rotation. Like that's just too many of them. So if you got off Vando, I like Isaac as a spiritual replacement, the spiritual successor to Jared Vanderbilt in that general role. Now, the issue here, I mean, the real issue is that JJ does not like guys who can't shoot. So I think Jonathan Isaac would just be collecting dust on the bench, but it's different collecting it in a minimum contract rather than $12+ million, which Vando is doing, which is like, I mean, he's making Kelly Oubre money to not play or barely play, and not has not just lived up to the contract either. In terms of Zaire Williams, I like him. I just think right now he's still relatively unproven, and if you sign him for a minimum, I'd be cool with him. There's athleticism, the shot has developed a bit, he plays hard, and there's some defensive utility and a little upside there. But yeah. I'm going to wrap here, though. I got live for over 4 hours today. And I will be going live for several hours tomorrow, several hours on Wednesday, and then we'll be on NBA TV for most of the day on Thursday. So looking forward to that, going out to their studio and going to be doing free agency coverage in person. So we'll probably go live at some point later that day. But appreciate you guys for rocking with me. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back tomorrow. The offseason officially starts in the context of free agency. Free agency begins at 3 p.m. Pacific time. So we'll be back at 11 a.m. with Lakers Collective and our new third host, Pete Zayas of Laker Film Room. Shout out to Pete. Really pumped about that. And then after that, we'll be going live, going into free agency and covering the flurry of moves that inevitably happens. And Walker Kessler and Jalen Duren are going to take all these meetings and make a decision in potentially a few minutes. We'll see how that plays out. But shout out to the chat. Shout out to the Late Night Gang. Shout out to JSM for making his debut on the show. Appreciate you all and talk to you all tomorrow.